The first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, was a man who believed himself destined to reshape the world. He had risen from the chaos of the warring states period, uniting kingdoms under one rule, and now he sought to erase every trace of the old order. For him, power was not just about conquest, but about control over minds and memory. In his vast court at Xianyang, whispers carried of the emperor's obsession. He demanded not only obedience, but eternal remembrance. He wanted to live forever in both flesh and name, and anything that threatened his vision of immortality filled him with rage. For the emperor, knowledge itself could be a weapon sharper than any sword. The empire stretched like never before. Roads, canals, and walls bound the land into a single body. Yet Qin Shi Huang was restless. He had conquered armies, dethroned kings, and chained nobles, but he could not conquer doubt. The scholars, with their ink and scrolls, spoke of ancient traditions, of dynasties long past, of sages who valued virtue over power. Their words undermined his authority. One evening, under the dim light of oil lamps, the emperor summoned his ministers. The room smelled of smoke and ink. He declared that the old books had to die. History, he said, was treason. Only the present and the future, he commanded, would remain. A chilling silence filled the hall as his decree fell upon trembling ears. "Those who speak of the past defy me," Qin thundered. "Those who glorify the Zhou or the feeble kings before me spit upon my throne. Let their words burn. Let their mouths be silenced forever." The ministers bowed low, though fear made their knees tremble. None dared oppose him. The next day, soldiers marched into libraries, schools, and private homes. They tore bamboo strips from shelves, broke wooden tablets, and gathered every text that bore the names of ancient poets, philosophers, and historians. The crackle of fire soon filled the empire. Flames consumed Confucian classics, Taoist treatises, and works of history that had survived centuries. Ash replaced wisdom. The scholars, keepers of knowledge, watched helplessly as their life's work turned to smoke. They muttered in secret, lamenting the death of history. Some whispered that Qin Shi Huang was mad, others that he feared the truth of the past. But words spoken in shadows carried deadly risk, for the emperor's spies listened even in silence. Rumors reached the court that a group of scholars mocked the emperor's obsession with immortality. They claimed no elixir of life could be found, no ritual could prevent death. The emperor's rage burned hotter than the fires that devoured books. To question his immortality was to declare him mortal, and to him that was treason. The punishment was swift and merciless. Hundreds of scholars were arrested, their hands bound with rope, their robes stained with dirt. They were dragged before the emperor's judgment hall, where he sat upon a throne carved of black stone, eyes cold as iron. Their crimes were read aloud: defiance, deceit, blasphemy against the Son of Heaven. The emperor's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You question my rule, you poison the people with lies of the past. If the past lives, my empire dies. For this, you shall meet the earth." His command was not for execution by sword, but something more cruel. He ordered them buried alive. In the barren fields outside the capital, pits were dug beneath the scorching sun. Soldiers forced the scholars into these graves, their cries echoing against the sky. Some begged for mercy. Others cursed the emperor with their final breath. Earth was shoveled upon them, slowly suffocating their voices. The soil became their coffin. The people watched from a distance, horror etched on their faces. Mothers held children close, fathers bowed their heads in silence. None dared intervene. The message was clear: to speak, to question, to remember, was death. Fear became the emperor's most loyal weapon. When the last scholar's voice was muffled by earth, the emperor stood over the graves unmoved. He believed he had destroyed doubt itself. His empire would have one truth, one voice, his own. He turned away, leaving behind mounds of dirt that swallowed both men and knowledge. The night after the burial, the air of Xianyang felt heavy. Smoke still rose from piles of burned books, and the cries of the dead seemed to linger in the wind. Yet the emperor celebrated. In his palace, he drank wine from golden cups, declaring himself eternal, unchallenged, unmatched. But beneath the emperor's triumph lay an emptiness. The empire had been robbed of memory, its wisdom buried with its guardians. The soil was rich not only with the bodies of scholars, but with the death of centuries of learning. The silence left behind was more haunting than the cries. Still, Qin Shi Huang was not satisfied. Destroying history was only one step. He demanded the impossible, the secret of immortality. And as his court scrambled to serve his will, the empire braced for more madness, more cruelty, and more rivers of blood. For the emperor had tasted the power of erasing voices, and he hungered for more. After silencing the scholars and burning the words of the past, Qin Shi Huang turned his gaze toward a dream that tormented him day and night: immortality. He had erased history, but time still stalked him. Death loomed like an enemy he could not crush with armies or walls. The emperor's physicians and alchemists became his most valued servants. He demanded elixirs, potions, and talismans that could preserve his life. From dawn until dusk, they experimented with mercury, jade, and strange herbs gathered from mountains and rivers. Each failure meant death for the unlucky alchemist. In the palace, bottles filled with glistening liquid lined shelves like trophies of desperation. Qin Shi Huang swallowed pills of mercury and drank potions laced with crushed jade, believing each sip pushed death further away. Instead, poison seeped into his body, rotting him from within, though none dared speak of it. To feed his obsession, he dispatched ships across the seas. His envoys sailed to the distant Eastern Isles, lands whispered to hold magical herbs of life. They never returned, swallowed by storms or perhaps by the lies of their own fear. Yet the emperor continued sending more, convinced that somewhere immortality awaited him. In the streets of Xianyang, the people murmured of their emperor's madness. Taxes grew heavier as the empire's wealth poured into impossible quests. Thousands of laborers were conscripted, dragged from their homes to build more palaces, roads, and tombs. Their sweat and blood became the foundation of his dream. The emperor trusted no one. Shadows haunted him, and betrayal seemed to hide behind every face. He moved constantly, traveling across the empire in search of sacred mountains said to hold the secret of life. His caravans stretched for miles, soldiers guarding him as if he were already a god. One night, while camped near the East China Sea, the emperor climbed a cliff where waves pounded the rocks below. He raised his arms to the sky, shouting at the heavens, "I am the son of heaven. Grant me eternity." His voice vanished into the roar of the tide. The gods, if they listened, remained silent. The emperor's cruelty deepened with his fear. He ordered the construction of hidden roads so assassins could not predict his path. Servants who spoke too loudly of his aging face or trembling hands vanished without a trace. Some were strangled in secret, others buried in shallow graves by the roadside. His court grew restless. Ministers flattered him with false hope, promising new discoveries of the elixir. Each promise bought them more time, but failure brought ruin. A single misstep could end with their family executed, their names erased from stone. Terror was the only language the court dared speak, but outside the palace walls people remembered. Though books were burned, fragments of wisdom survived in secret. Families whispered Confucian sayings to children in the dark of night, committing them to memory since ink and paper could no longer preserve them. The emperor had not destroyed history entirely, it lived in hidden hearts. Meanwhile, the emperor's health faltered. His hair thinned, his skin turned grey from the mercury he consumed, and his body weakened, though his armies remained strong. He lashed out at anyone who hinted at mortality, demanding instead songs of his greatness and poems of his eternal reign. To hide his decay, he ordered painters to depict him as godlike, tall, youthful, and radiant. These portraits were paraded through the empire, forcing the people to bow before images that bore little resemblance to the withered man who hid behind palace walls. Yet Qin Shi Huang was not blind to his fading strength. He turned his paranoia upon the world itself. "If I die," he whispered to his ministers, "the empire will break apart. Enemies will rise, rebels will come, and all I have built will vanish like smoke." His words carried the weight of truth. So he began to plan for eternity not only in life, but in death. Deep beneath the earth, workers carved out chambers vast enough to house an empire. Rivers of mercury were poured into canals to mimic flowing streams. Mountains of bronze, jade, and gold were raised underground. This was to be his eternal palace. Day after day, Tens of thousands of laborers worked until their backs broke. Some died beneath the crushing stones, others from exhaustion. The emperor's tomb swallowed lives even before it was finished. The whispers among the workers called it a palace of death, but none dared speak beyond hushed tones. To guard this underworld, sculptors molded legions of clay warriors. Each face was unique, carved with painstaking detail, as if a real army had been reborn in earth and fire. When arranged in endless ranks, they stood ready to protect their master, even after the final breath left his body. The emperor visited the construction site in secret, torchlight flickering over walls carved with constellations. He walked among his clay soldiers and smiled, whispering, "You will guard me when heaven cannot." It was the only comfort he allowed himself, though death continued to stalk his footsteps. As years passed, his madness grew sharper. He no longer trusted his sons, suspecting them of waiting for his death. He replaced generals, executed advisors, and tightened his grip on the empire. The more he tried to escape death, the more he resembled a man already haunted by it. And yet he would not stop. If no elixir could be found, he swore that his tomb would grant him eternity. The empire bled to build it, but the emperor did not care. He believed the world itself was his body, and as long as it lived, so would he. The sky darkened with storms, the land cracked under the weight of labor, and the people wept in silence. But Qin Shi Huang continued his quest, blind to the truth that in his hunger for immortality, he was burying his empire alive along with the scholars, the books and the voices he had silenced. The years weighed heavily upon Qin Shi Huang. Though he hid behind portraits of youth and legends of eternity, his body betrayed him. His skin grew ashen, his hands trembled, and his voice cracked like old wood. Still, he raged against the truth. Death stalked him more fiercely than any enemy he had conquered. By now the emperor traveled endlessly, refusing to remain in one palace for long. He believed demons sought to claim him, and by moving constantly, he could elude them. His entourage, thousands strong, dragged across mountains, deserts, and coasts, burdened by his fear of shadows. One summer, his caravan crossed the northern plains. Heat shimmered over the horizon, and the emperor, weakened by the mercury he swallowed daily, collapsed in his carriage. Ministers rushed to his side, their faces pale with dread. To admit his illness was dangerous. Acknowledging his mortality was an act of treason. So they knelt before him, whispering lies of recovery. "You are eternal, Son of Heaven. This fever is but the heat of summer." But the emperor's breaths came heavy, his chest rattling like a drum of war. His dream of immortality was slipping through his fingers. That night he summoned his most trusted minister, elixir, and his favorite son, Huhai. With weak eyes he ordered them to protect his legacy at any cost. "If I fall," he rasped, "the empire must not fracture. My tomb will be my palace. My army will guard me. Keep my death hidden until my reign is eternal." The next morning, Qin Shi Huang's heart gave its final beat. The man who had burned books, buried scholars, and enslaved millions to build his vision of eternity now lay still and lifeless. His dream had ended, though none dared speak the word death aloud. Panic gripped the court. Ministers feared chaos if news spread too soon. So they sealed the emperor's carriage, filling it with carts of rotting fish to mask the stench of his decaying body. Soldiers marched in silence, guarding a corpse while pretending their master still lived. The emperor's body was eventually taken to the colossal tomb beneath Mount Li. The underground palace stretched for miles, filled with rivers of mercury, ceilings painted with stars, and floors lined with treasures. The clay army of thousands stood in rows, weapons ready. Eternal sentinels for a master who could no longer command them. As the coffin was lowered into the chamber, torches flickered, illuminating the faces of the terracotta soldiers. Each clay warrior seemed to watch silently as the emperor descended into darkness. Earth swallowed the Son of Heaven, just as it had swallowed the scholars he condemned years before. To protect the secrets of the tomb, workers who knew its design were sealed inside, buried alive just like the scholars. Their screams echoed in the dark, fading as soil crushed their lungs. The tomb became not just the emperor's palace, but a mass grave for the countless souls sacrificed for his vision. Outside, the empire trembled. The first emperor's death, hidden in secrecy, left a power vacuum. Ministers forged edicts in his name, manipulating the succession. His son Huai, weak and pliable, was placed upon the throne as Qin Shi, while rivals were executed before they could claim power. But the people, exhausted by endless labor and crushed under heavy taxes, began to rebel. The silence enforced by terror cracked like ice under pressure. Farmers abandoned fields, soldiers deserted armies, and whispers of revolt spread across the land. Within years, the empire that Qin Shi Huang had built with rivers of blood began to collapse. Flames of rebellion rose in villages, and generals declared independence. The great wall he built could not keep his empire from shattering from within, yet the tomb remained sealed. Beneath Mount Li, the emperor slept in darkness, surrounded by rivers of poison and legions of clay. His quest for immortality had failed in life, but in death he achieved a strange eternity. His tomb endured, hidden for centuries, waiting to be unearthed. When later generations spoke of him, they remembered both his greatness and his cruelty. He had unified China, forged roads, weights, and laws that bound the land together. But they also remembered the smoke of burning books, the graves of scholars, and the cries of those buried to guard his corpse. The irony of his reign lingered. In seeking to erase history, he became unforgettable. His tyranny, his madness, his hunger for eternity ensured his name would never vanish. Qin Shi Huang had tried to silence the past, but instead, he became part of the very history he tried to destroy. Centuries later, when farmers stumbled upon fragments of clay near Xi'an, the earth revealed what the emperor had hidden. The Terracotta Army, silent and unblinking, stood as witnesses to his obsession. Each warrior a ghost of the empire, each face a memory carved in clay. And so the emperor who buried scholars alive could not bury the truth of his own mortality. His empire crumbled, his body rotted, but his legend endured. Death had claimed him, but history, which he tried so desperately to silence, spoke louder than ever. The Son of Heaven, who dreamed of living forever, had ensured his immortality not through elixirs or armies, but through the memory of his cruelty. The rivers of blood he spilled became the ink of his story, written across centuries, never to be erased.